Hey everyone, it's Laura from Children's. It's 11 o'clock on a Friday, so you know where we're at. We're talking Mom Talks. Today we're talking about stress fractures with Dr. Blatnick, one of our sports medicine doctors at the Young Athletes Center here at the Children's Specialty Care Center. I don't know if you can tell, we're on AstroTurf. This is a really cool space for our young athletes as they rehab. So we're taking advantage of their space today to talk about stress fractures. So I think, what are some of the common misconceptions when it comes to stress fractures?
So, stress fractures is not something that happens acutely. So it's something that tends to be something that happens sort of over time. So you start to feel pain somewhere when you're doing an activity and it sort of just gets worse over time. So it's not something like boom, always that you know that it happens. It's something that kind of just accrues over time.
I guess when you think of a common fracture,
yeah,
it's like, oh, this just happened.
Yeah, this happened, I've swelled, I'm bruised, I hurt. But
Yeah.
stress fractures tend to be a little less like sort of, bruising and swelling. You just kind of, it's sort of a slow process usually.
So I guess kind of tell us, like, what is a stress fracture?
Yeah, so stress fractures happen because sort of for two reasons. So one, sometimes overuse. So you're just using a bone or a limb a little bit too much.
Okay.
Or it can happen because of sort of mechanical issues. So bad footwear, bad sort of conditions, so bad turf, things like that. It sort of just happens over time. So it sort of is, you start to overuse that bone and it just over time gets a little bit more worn down and then you start to get a little fracture in that area.
Sounds painful just thinking about it. As always, you guys ask us questions if you've got one. We're happy to help and we're here. Otherwise, I'm going with my experience and my young athletes, so bring on the questions. I guess, is there a common bone that this happens to? It sounds like maybe this is a lower extremity.
Yes, you can really get stress fractures anywhere, but I would say probably the lower leg foot is probably the most common. So usually the shin or the foot we see it most often.
And so what kind of sports are you seeing those kind of injuries with most often?
Yeah, so runners is one big population.
Oh, just runners in general.
Just runners in general. So especially the foot, sometimes with their mechanics or their shoes, sometimes or just accumulating a lot of mileage, we'll see a lot of stress fractures sort of within the foot bones.
Okay, so it sounds like the footwear can help prevent?
Yeah,
Does that seem fair?
It can, yeah. So you want to make sure you're changing out your footwear fairly often. So we usually say like 300 to 500 miles on your footwear for a runner. And so a lot of runners will I just change them out once a year, I change them out every 6 months. And if you're a really dedicated runner and doing a lot of miles, you gotta think about it a little more often because that padding in that shoe wear gets worn down over time and you're just not getting as much cushion. And so those bones really,
it's not them growing out of their shoes like they tend to do so quickly.
Yeah.
It's more the breakdown of the shoe.
Yeah.
And that's gonna cause, is it, I don't know what the word is it the pounding on their legs and ankles? Is that what's causing the stress fracture?
Yeah, usually, so it's impact related. So just that repetitive impact over time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess, are you seeing these more between girls or boys? Are these older kids, younger kids?
So we do tend to see it probably at, say, more the adolescent age group. You can't get them anytime. So I've seen them as young as probably 6 or 7 sometimes if they're just doing a repetitive sport. So we had a soccer player that was playing like 5-6 days a week and, in cleats, which don't have a lot of padding. And so we've seen some stress fractures there. But generally sort of that adolescent population, they're the ones that are building up more mileage when they're running or doing sort of more competitive sports. And so sometimes they'll be the ones that are more at risk. The boy-girl thing, it's a little bit mixed. So both of them are probably.
So nobody is prone to this?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No.
So I think one thing I think would be helpful is what are the complaints your kid's going to give you? Like, you think about them running during a soccer game for an hour, a basketball game for an hour, and they're going to be sore and tired, but how do you know the difference between muscle aches and, maybe you kind of hurt yourself?
Yeah. At first it can be a little bit hard to tell. So, they will complain of pain more when they're doing the sport. And so at first it'll start out like, it just hurts when I go to play soccer. But like when I'm done, it doesn't hurt anymore. The next day they get up and walk.
Oh, that's
feels
interesting.
Okay. But then as it starts to probably get worse, then they're like, now it hurts. It hurts the next day. It starts to hurt when I'm just walking or doing things like that if it's like a foot or a lower leg. So the pain will just gradually sort of accrue over time.
And what are some of those like words that we should listen for? Is it like a sharp pain? Do they say it's like a big bruise? So
the stress fracture tends to be a little more like achy. Like it just sort of aches and throbs sort of when they're doing the activity or afterwards.
Makes my toes curl. I don't like thinking about it as it is. So more of that achy joint, So I guess in those lower extremities, is it in the joint, or would they find it like in their shins?
Yeah, so usually you get it kind of along the middle or the front of the shin, and then a lot of them happen sort of on the top of the foot. So it's your metatarsal bone, so sort of this part of the foot. You can get them anywhere in the foot, but it tends to be sort of in that metatarsal region, so kind of across here. And you kind of, if you push around on your kid's foot, you kind of will feel like a pinpoint spot, and they'll right
squeeze
on that spot.
Oh, I think we have a question.
What is the fastest way to heal a stress fracture?
Ooh, great question. So rest is super important for a stress fracture. So getting rid of that impact for a little while, because just continuing pounding on it is not going to get any better by doing that. And then occasionally we will put them in something to immobilize them or to kind of take the weight off of it. So sometimes that'll mean if it's a lower leg, it'll mean a boot. Sometimes it can mean a cast if it's really sore. So it just depends on how much it's bugging you.
So I guess your kid tells you, hey, I'm having this pain. You're kind of like, okay, I think this is what it is.
Yeah.
Letting them rest. Are we talking about icing or heat or anything like that too at home?
You can. I mean, sometimes ice makes them feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
I would usually stick more towards ice for that, but you know, you just just basically keeping them out.
Elevated? Anything like that?
Yeah, you can.
Not gonna hurt it?
Not gonna hurt it. But yeah, you just want to just try and get them to rest. Like let them take a few days off and see how it feels.
Yeah, if they're feeling better.
If they're feeling better, maybe they can try and go back. A stress fracture won't get better that fast, so if they're still complaining after that, then it's probably a good idea to get it checked out.
And so when do we call the doctor to say, you know what, I don't know.
Yeah,
what are we supposed to do?
I would say if they're having a lot of pain just walking around at school, so if they're even complaining when they're just simply walking.
Yeah.
And then if they do try and rest and hey, it's still there,
Yeah.
it's probably a good time to get checked out.
Oh, makes your toes hurt just thinking that. So after they've rested, if they need the boot, how long would they be in the boot? Because that would take them off of sports
Yeah,
too.
that would take them off of sports too. So I would say usually most stress fractures probably about 4 weeks.
Okay.
It just sort of depends on what part of the body that it's located in, but average I would say probably about 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay. So do you see stress fractures in the upper arms or wrists or shoulders?
You can.
Okay.
So think about
I'm trying to think what
Yeah.
sport that would entail.
Yeah, so gymnastics. So
well, there you go.
Yeah, so gymnasts that spend a lot of time on their hands, on their
Yeah.
arms, can end up getting stress fractures there. I've actually seen one in like a collarbone from a softball player, just repetitive sort of throwing. If they're not throwing the right way, sometimes they
I think
can get some
cheerleading would
stress.
fall into that
Potentially,
too.
yeah. Potentially, yeah. Some of that, because they do tumbling, stunting things, and anything you're doing sort of repetitively over and over again can put you at risk. So you can't get them up here.
Yeah.
It's just less common.
And so prevention-wise, because they're doing the sport they love, how do we help break up that routine that might help us prevent them?
Yeah, so I mean, coaches and stuff have to be aware too of sort of the way they do practices and things, making sure they're not just doing the same sort of motion over and over again. I think cross training is really important, so I always talk about that with runners, especially cross country runners. They kind of get into that, especially during the season. They'll be running 6-7 days a week, and so
Sounds terrible.
So I try to tell them you need to do something else during that time. So either biking, elliptical swimming, something else that's going to just break up that routine. It's something that's not so much weight bearing on those legs. Just give them a break for a day or so, and you still get a lot of good stuff out of cross training.
Yeah.
Heart rate gets up, you can still get a lot of endurance, so it's actually good for you.
Is something like physical therapy needed, either once you have a stress fracture or maybe to even help prevent?
Yeah, so oftentimes we'll have them do it after they've had the stress fracture for a couple reasons. So one, just to get their body strong again, because if you've been in a boot or a cast or have been off from sports, you need to build that strength back up again. The other thing is that if they got the stress fracture because of mechanical issues, so if they got it because of the way they run or something like that, sometimes physical therapy can help sort of fix
their
that.
form or whatever.
Yeah, and fix that, and so prevent maybe from happening
Okay.
again.
So once you have one stress fracture, say in your shin, are you more prone to do it again?
Depends
in
on
that shin, or maybe it goes somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, probably it's more if you don't fix why it happened in the first place.
Okay.
So if you don't fix the running 6-7 days a week, or if you don't fix why your mechanics were the way they were, if you don't fix that, then you probably are. But if you get it better and you sort of fix the things that led up to it, then usually you do pretty well.
So a stress fracture wouldn't sideline our kids from their sports career, but maybe for a week or two, they need to recover, just like they would with anything.
Yeah, so once you get that stress fracture better, you want to do your rehab, and then you should be able to slowly work your way back. And we always emphasize the slow part of it. So you don't just want to get better from your stress fracture and just go running right back out to what you were doing before. You want to just build yourself up slowly.
Is there any way a stress fracture could turn into something worse if it's not addressed? Like, would it actually break?
It can. So that's always what we tell, we
Yeah.
tell athletes is that if you don't address it, you can get a full fracture. And that can
Yeah.
be much, much worse. So it
Yeah.
can take a lot longer to get better. A little tiny crack is going to be much easier to get better than a big broken through crack.
Yeah.
And that can happen if they just keep running or doing
Yeah,
whatever
try and
sport it
push
is.
through the pain,
Yeah.
or I'm fine, I'll go back out.
Yeah.
We talked to Dr. Halstead last week about concussions, and he kind of said the same thing. Rest. It's the one thing you cannot rush, and it sounds like this is the same thing. You just
Yeah.
cannot make them play through it,
Yeah.
push through it. And even though they're young athletes, and that's how
Yeah.
a lot of these kids are driven, it's not going to help them.
Yeah, it's just going to keep getting worse if you don't just take the time. And a bone only heals so fast. So
Yeah, you
can't
can
make
only do so
you
much.
can't make a bone heal any quicker than what it's going to do. So you need probably 4 weeks or so for it to get better. So
Yeah.
you just have to take that time. So
There it is, time. That's all you can do. And there are some preventative measures, but time. Make your kids strong again.
yeah.
Have I missed anything that our parents would love to know, or that I might have missed, or anything that you feel like you're telling parents when you see kiddos come in?
Yeah, so I think cross training, as I mentioned, is probably the biggest thing, especially if you're a runner, just making sure that's part of your workout.
Yeah.
And even though coaches tend to push a little more towards just running, just straight running, trying to add that in can be super important, especially if you've ever had a stress fracture
Yeah.
too. Especially when athletes go back a season later after they've had a stress fracture, just making sure that they
Yeah.
include that in their workouts.
Is stretching a part of that too, or is it just mainly the strength endurance piece of it? Does stretching?
Yeah, stretching is really injury preventative all around. So we always try and get people to do that regardless of what injury they had or why they've had it.
Got it. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Dr. Blatnick. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope this was informative and helpful to keep your young athletes safe. We will see you next week. Actually, back here at the Children's Specialty Care Center, talking to Brittany about bike helmet fittings. You will get to meet my son Connor. We are going to fit him for a bike helmet, and that way we can make sure our kiddos are safe on their bikes, rollerblades, hoverboards, whatever has more wheels than a car, basically. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week at 11.